And we're quite literally in and recording just as the loft conversion across the road started hammering. That is the notion of Zoom. We love it. So welcome to the Good Listening To show here on UK Health Radio with me, Chris Grimes. I am the curator of this lovely energetic space called The Clearing, where anything is possible. It's where all good questions come to be asked and all good stories come to be told. And I'm delighted to welcome to the Good Listening To show Clearing today a man who I'm extremely fond of, Mr. William Goodchild. I will bid you several welcomes shortly, but you are illustrious company indeed, because I'm supremely aware, apart from our connections of our eyes having met across a playground, which is where I first met you. We can talk about that later. You provide many of the musical soundscapes to narrations by David Attenborough, because you're a composer, an orchestrator, and a conductor. You're my only guest who has a diploma of licentiate in pianoforte, please. And that's not a sentence structure I've ever constructed. But anyway, a man who is just a really lovely man. And you are guest number 3, William Goodchild. And I'm going to call you Sir William of the Goodchild because it's only a matter of time. And so it's a bit like cashier number 3, please. You're my guest number 3. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted, and this is going to be a lovely conversation, to welcome William Goodchild to The Clearing. Welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody.
Yes, welcome. So we met, our eyes met across a playground. Our daughters were at school together. And you're also a very generous man in that you've also, apart from providing musical skates to lots of really beautiful natural history documentaries and other stuff over time. I know that you're a conductor for the Bristol Symphony Orchestra, or you were until 2020. So I'll get you speaking now. So what is a clearing like for you, William? Where do you go to get clutter-free, inspirational, and able to think?
Yes, that's a really good question, Chris, because the first thing that came to mind, there were 2 things, actually: physical clearing and then a kind of temporal clearing. The physical clearing that came straight to mind when I was a few months old, my parents found that they were looking for a house for my mum's brother in North Devon, and they found this little house, and he was abroad, and they ended up buying this kind of tumble down cottage in a tiny village of North Devon called Welcombe. And we were living in London. I grew up in London, and on the holidays we would go down to North Devon and to Welcombe and to have our holidays there. And the first thing that came to mind with clearing was the cliffs on Welcombe Mouth, above Welcombe Mouth Beach. And I just remember so many hours spent there on that wonderful beach, and particularly on the top of the cliffs, looking over left down to Cornwall and then to right up the north coast of Devon. And just, it was probably a temporal clearing as well, because it was holiday time and it was, everything else had stopped, and it was just this wondrous, wild, rugged place. So when I think of clearing, I think of that place immediately. It was the first thing that came to mind.
By the way, delicious answer, because of the segue into welcome to the clearing, and you went back to a welcome space in your life throughout your life. Your father was Australian, I understand, and he was called Ronald, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right. He was born in Australia, but he moved over to England and to London when he was 4. So he didn't spend very long there. His dad was a pastor, and I think he was spreading, Christianity across parts of Australia, which is when my dad was born there. But they came back. My dad was born in 1910, and they moved back in, I think, 1914 at the start of the First World War. So yeah, that's right. Yes.
And your father very romantically married you in 1990. I remember reading that about you in the wonderful. I've really enjoyed researching you, by the way.
Oh, okay. Well, yes, he did. Yes, he married Rachel and me in 1990, and that was great. He followed his dad into the church, and and eventually ended up working in London as a bishop in West London. And it was he was a lovely person. He was a real people person, my dad, and a very kind person, a very interested, curious person, great reader, and he was just a lovely person. Yeah, and we were very lucky because he married us. He said, oh, one thing I remember about that occasion was when he said there were 3 rings in a marriage. You probably know this one.
It's a great joke. I hope you're going where you think you're going.
Yes, well, no, not there. With the Australian connection, absolutely. No, but he said, there was the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and the suffering.
We love him for that.
Anyway, yeah. So,
and by the way, he was a very independent chap, I'm hearing, because just going back a few paragraphs, you said he moved back from Australia when he was 4.
incredibly independent and resilient, yes.
I moved to Uganda when I was 2.5, so I'm just slightly more independent than your father.
You probably passed each other on the ocean.
Lovely. So the Welcome Clearing and the Welcome Cliffs, that's a beautiful place to position us, where I'm going to take you through the lovely storytelling metaphors of the Good Listening To show. So we're going to be in your clearing, and then we're going to arrive with a tree now to begin to shake your tree to see which storytelling apples fall out. And then we're going to talk about alchemy and gold. And then I'll also talk a bit about Shakespeare. Ooh. And then I'll award you with a cake at the very end of our conversation. So that's what the listeners and us can look forward to. So thank you for beautifully positioning. I think it's the Welcome Cliff, you said, didn't you?
Yes, the Welcome Cliff, yes.
So if I may, I bid us both welcome, and I'm going to arrive with a tree now to shake your tree to see which storytelling apples fall out. So this is where you've had 5 minutes, William Goodchild, to have thought about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that never fail to grab your attention. Squirrels, borrowed from the film Up. See what I did there? And then 1 quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't possibly know until you tell us. You don't have to download all the apples all at once. Let them, drop out of the tree as if we're re-exploring gravity and the physical force thereof. You can crunch wherever you want. So over to you.
Great. Well, the first thing about this shaking the tree thing is that I'm working on a project at the moment, a natural history film, in which a giant bull elephant in the Kalahari, and they're kind of 6-tonner elephants. There are these fan palms, I think they're called, and the bulls will go up to them and hoik the trees, and this amazing fruit falls out of it, and the rest of the elephant troop catch up, and then they have this amazing feast. So it was just an image that came to mind.
Oh, and by the way, I love that you're going into the creative process about what inspires you when you then have to write the soundscape for that, and how fascinating. And if you don't mind, I've been really excited to talk to you about Africa's river giants as well in what we talk about. Partly because there's, the comedian me can't resist. The African river giants was the one that Sir David Attenborough narrated about hippos being a paradox. They're vegetarian, but they're incredibly dangerous. And the comedian in me wants to go to the research of this about what you did to prepare. Because there is a joke about a convention of African scientists all trying to debate the derivation of the African word wawumba. And they're debating whether it's about childbirth or whatever it's about. But then the punchline of the joke is, I bet you've never even heard a hippo, let alone had one fat underwater. So the wawumba. So what I was intrigued to ask you is, for your research, William Goodchild, have you ever heard a hippo fart underwater?
No, I haven't.
No. So sorry, that was a slight tangent, but going back to
sorry, there is one thing that I would like to add, that because you were saying about they're extremely aggressive, and they do have this behavior in order to mark their territory, the big males, particularly if there are young hippos around, where they'll defecate at quite a rate, and their tail whizzes like a propeller and spreads them up everywhere. And I remember that from the film. There's quite a nice moment where that behavior comes through.
And in the process that you go through, on a serious note, then, are you sent the
Mm,
film and then you get to watch it, and then your mindscape goes to the conductor's space? Because I'm intrigued by your
mm,
process, because the music is
mm.
sublime.
Yeah, the process is a really interesting one. I mean, if you imagine these films, they take probably 3 or 4 years to make, perhaps, in terms of inception, being commissioned, filming, and so forth. And then you have this period of having done the filming of post-production, which will take a huge number of these programs take place in Bristol, of course, whether it's at the BBC Natural History Unit or whether it's one of the independent production companies in Bristol. But there's this edit process. Um, and it follows just the rough shape of it is that you have initially an assembly of pictures thrown together that you know that are the beginnings of a story. And I think that the whole project is about making a fantastic story about whatever your subject is. Now, for something like a natural world film like that, you have maybe an edit of about 10 to 12 weeks. And during that process, there are various cuts which are viewed by the exec and so on, the commissioners, to see how the thing is going. And if possible, as composer, you want to get in really early, because those sort of early parts of the edit allow you some time to get to know the film, to get to know the story and the ideas behind it, the main characters, some of the outstanding behavior, and the big ideas and things in the film as well, and to start developing some musical things that can be tried out. And the whole process is very, very fluid. So, it's quite insecure in a way, basically. You often write something and then that sequence may change or may disappear or move to a different part of the film. And it may be, so that the whole thing is being developed, being crafted. And the other thing about it is that it's incredibly collegial. So as a composer, if you write for the concert hall or a performance, you're writing just music for that occasion. But with a film, you're working with narration and you're working with sound effects. You're working with picture, and therefore the music is constantly in relation and sometimes competing with, playing against all of these things, these other elements.
And you've got to be incredibly good at taking feedback then, because I'm hearing that your sequence might get shunted off, and they won't necessarily, if they change the vision scape, they don't necessarily always take your music scape with it, I'm assuming.
No, they don't. I mean, actually, the editors who are brilliant at laying music, particularly these wonderful editors in Bristol who are working on these programs. I mean, everyone's aware of what's going on, and so everyone's trying to make the best use and the most use of what you do. But yep. I mean, that it is. You put your heart into it and your mind into it, knowing that eventually something is going to develop out of that. And sometimes it's the first thing you write. And at other times you're struggling with, a 1.5 minute cue and you just can't quite nail it. And you might be there 7, 8, 9 iterations of this thing to get it right. So there's about 35 or 40 on an hour film. It's about 35 or 40 short musical pieces. And the other thing to say is that I'm one of the things that I love is silence, is musical silence, because it allows the listener to be in the place of the film and to experience being there, being in the habitat, being in the environment. And also that space, those breathing spaces, also strengthen the music so that when it's in for a very good reason. It's telling you a part of the story that perhaps you're not seeing or hearing, not seeing in picture or not hearing in the narration. It's got an independent life, if you like. So it's this balance of music and silence and this fluid process. And if you're lucky at the end, we have a thing called picture lock, when the picture no longer changes in its edit. Yeah. It's fixed. And that's a great moment because then you can sort of tie everything down. and hopefully you'll have 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes it's more, and the job I'm doing at the moment will be 6 weeks, to pull everything together and perhaps finish your recording and deliver everything.
I love the fact that you've planted the notion of the musicscape and the use of silence there. That's so lovely, because there's that delicious supposition that we experience gravitas and authority in life through the use of silence. And also you mentioned the word collegiate as well. And in my experience of you are so collegiate, you're so collaborative. You started out as a teacher of music too. So you've really been there working to enable young people as well.
I did, yes. I mean, when you start, I did. You're trying to find your way for quite a long time, aren't you, basically? And I was playing, doing sessions, playing jazz when I started out, and teaching piano, hence the that qualification to be able to.
Yes, the one I mentioned.
The one you mentioned. And yeah, I know, and it's a kind of funny thing, isn't it? It's funny how things evolve and what comes out of what, and so much of it is to do with people that you meet along the way and connections that happen, and the way that some idea you've got about what you'd like to be doing connects with some accident of fate at some point where somebody,
And by the way, even if I may, having you here as my supremely welcome guest in the clearing, you and I have been knocking along, I know we're all trying to find our way. I myself have been trying to find my way. You have done, you generous man, the music to Instant Wit, my comedy improvisation company. You also set the music to Turnip and Flange, where I was off on one trying to do a variety double act of Archie Turnip and Harry Flange, something a bit darker called Stan Trolley. But then even now we're back and I'm doing the Good Listening To podcast. This is me finding my way, but also you're so generous because I probably owe you loads of cash, but you've never taken any money from me because you are a man after my own heart. You always say yes. And even when I rang you up about this about 3 weeks ago, you immediately said yes. And I again adored you for it. The good news is there could be, I'm told, about 1.2 million ultimately listening to this. So I hope someday, you will get the recognition from me you deserve.
Let's do another one. I mean, I just love those projects, Chris. I mean, there's something about music and comedy, and I don't get to do much comedy in these things. Although in the Hippo film, there is a mating sequence, and it was perhaps the only time that I've been called to do a kind of jazz cue for a thing for these this beautiful mating, and they used as a guide for it. Bees do it,
yes,
and it was just charming. But comedy, comic stuff, music, they were great fun. Those projects, Chris, working with you, brilliant. And crazy.
Thank you very much. Here all week. And also thank you for mentioning hippos again, because just for our benefits, I can do an impression of a hippo and then decide whether you can set music to this. Okay. Here it comes.
Very good.
I am here all week, as we've described. Anyway, forgive me for tangenting beautifully, by the way, and thank you so much. This is a lovely conversation. Back to your tree. So just go there now. 4 things that have shaped you, William Goodchild.
Okay, well, just the 4 things are: family is the first thing. I mean, actually, when I listened to your question, I just thought everyone and everything, but cutting it down, family, and just to say about that, my own family, but also the families of my friends and closest friends as well, have shaped my life and thinking. Learning a musical instrument, which I started very young, around 5 or 6, because the kind of music programs in London when I was growing up were fabulous. So many people were able to study music at no cost. And of course, that's furnished all the kind of professional music making in the last sort of 20, 30 years. And it's got much harder for young people to do that. So yeah, learning a musical instrument. And that's been my life. Music has been my life ever since.
And William, what was your first instrument you picked up?
Well, I started on the violin. I had my family, I've got 4 elder sisters, and all except the eldest one, Gabriel, that all learnt a musical instrument. And at that stage, we went to the Royal College of Music as youngsters, and you had a complete music program for young people there. So you studied an instrument, you might study 2 instruments. You learned to sing, musicianship. You started that process of learning how to play in an orchestra, and one of my memories is at the end of the day, my sister, my youngest sister, used to play oboe in one of the orchestras, and I used to go and sit in the hall in the Royal College of Music while she was finishing their rehearsal, and then we'd go home together. And I just remember the sound of the orchestra, and it absolutely, it sort of lit a flame. I thought, this is fantastic. You know, I can remember that 6 or 7, having that feeling. And I think those things, you know, such a great thing to do, and so important, whether or not you pursue it in any way in later life. Of course, many do and enjoy playing for the whole of their lives, quite apart from being professional. Loads of amateur players and voluntary players that love making music. So learning a musical instrument.
And who nudged you through the doorway of you know, listening to music? And someone nudged you through a door into, hey, here's the world of music for you?
I think I think all sorts of things, really. You know, there was that. There was all the stuff I was learning at the Royal College. We went along on a Saturday morning to do that.
And so my question was, who put
Yeah.
you through the door? Was it your dad, your mum? Who nudged you all as a
Oh,
family?
I see what you mean. I don't know. I think being on the end of the family, with four sisters, I think I just went. You know, it's like, you know, and I think that was it. So I don't have a memory of how I actually got through the door.
And yet it's musically now part of your DNA, which is just really wonderful to notice. And it makes complete sense that now you've arrived at this clearing of William Goodchild music, which you are today.
Yeah, I think it's it's a cliche, isn't it? But it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? I think the thing about music, or any craft, whatever it might be, is that it's a great deal bigger than you are. And it's so much bigger than you are. And it gives you something that you can endlessly go into through your life, and you'll never get to the bottom of it. It's always revealing new secrets and discoveries and so on. So it's just fantastic to be involved with something like that, and to be able to share it with other people, share it in other media. Yeah, it's a sort of never-ending process.
There's such a generosity of spirit in what you're describing, the mindscape of a composer, the fact that it's collaborative and it's a gift. And it's incredibly profound as a gift to be able to realize other people's visions and stories through musical scoring, which is what I really admire you for.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's what fascinates me. You know, I mean, if you imagine, particularly in the sort of film industry, if you've, as a producer, you've been developing this idea, it's got to commission, you've filmed it, you've been living with this thing for ages. And in some cases, it can be 6 or 7 years before the thing is made, you know. Yeah. There's a real passion there in the filmmaker. And I'm just really interested, because the music is about how the film feels, that the mood of it, the emotion of it, and the drama of it, trying to uncover what a producer is wanting to feel, what they want the audience to feel. And the interesting thing about it is that you don't have any common language. So I think there's a lot of instinct involved. You know, I think there's only one producer that I've worked with that had any kind of musical training. And it was one of the early projects I did. And it was actually really helpful at that stage. But most producers know how they want to feel, but they have no idea really how to communicate that. And so there has to be this simpatico between you, and to try and uncover it. But that's what I consider my job, is to really get under the skin of what that is and serve the producer in the film.
That makes such profound sense in our journey of the stuff you've done for me, which I know is really small fry to the other stuff you've been doing. But it's because there is a simpatico, as you said. What a beautiful word! Because I am very unmusically gifted. I'm all about the verbal stuff, and so I absolutely, where I end, somebody else begins, and you absolutely do that as a composer, which is a profound skill.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a sort of magic that happens, isn't there? And I think it's like, it's in the communication, isn't it? And in the friendship and these other things that some sort of magic happens. And I don't quite know where it comes from. And a lot of it is kind of toe testing, trying something. But yeah.
You remember, by the way, there was a recurring joke in our working together. I used to find myself funny when I said it, but I always used to say to you, so just when are the banjos coming in?
That's right. It was all banjo centered, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right.
It was. And there's a joke, isn't there, about if you're on top of a very high-rise building and you simultaneously throw a set of bagpipes and an accordion, you throw them off the roof simultaneously, which instrument hits the ground first? And the punchline is, who cares? Which does them a really bad disservice, I know, because there's a place for every instrument, which is the great thing.
Yeah, I just let you into something at the moment, which is that I'm exploring at the moment the potential of animal calls to be instruments.
Oh, wow.
And the potential is there. It's really quite extraordinary. And I'm working with a young sound designer called Dan Pollard, who I taught a few years ago. I did a bit of teaching at Bristol University on a music for film course. And Dan is a very brilliant musician. And we're sort of working together to take these sounds and see what we can create, what new instruments we can create. Now, the point about it is that when you finish messing around with them, you don't know that that's what they are. But there's something alive in the tone when a sound is made by, whether it's a person, a vocal sound, or from an animal. There's something alive in the DNA about the sound, and we're sort of experimenting with it and to see if it can become a sort of element in the score for the project I'm working on at the moment.
Which allows me to say, listen to this space. Lovely. Back to your tree. We're still shaking away here, and forgive me if I keep going down rabbit holes of tangents. This is really exciting. So we're still on shaping you, but we'll get on at a bit of a lick now. So other things that have shaped you.
There are other things that are shaped. Well, I actually do a bit of yoga now, Chris, and my wife Rachel has been doing it for a long time. Her mother has been doing yoga all her life. Janet, who's in her mid-80s now. And finally, I had that thing in the morning, when you're putting on your socks and you notice those strange sounds that you make when you bend over and there's a sort of creak and there's also a sort of thing. And Rachel, ever vigilant, spotted this and said, look, it's really time for you to give this a shot. So this is about now 5 years ago. And I started a class in Bristol, which we did once a week. And I'm now doing online twice a week with a fantastic teacher called Jan Dean. And if we're talking about things that shape you, that's definitely one of them.
Because you're not a short man, shall we say? You're quite tall, aren't you? So I totally relate to the other end going, ow, as you're trying to get the box on. And I am completely there. I play tennis and ping pong to keep myself agile and swim. I think my suspicion is I don't have the patience ultimately for yoga. I've dallied with it, but I invariably find I have to wait too long.
Well, you're right. I mean, it's incredibly slow. And when I think now, because I wrote to the court and just said, I was just really interested. When did I actually start this? And she said, well, actually started in kind of January 2016. And I was having all kinds of sort of like arm problems and things with conducting, things that I'd never had before. And I thought, I've got to try and sort of, I don't want this to deteriorate. Do you know what I mean? Just left left to its own devices.
Yes.
And I think the thing that I like about yoga is it's a bit like learning a musical instrument in the sense that it is incredibly slow and it's very gradual. You don't actually notice from week to week that you're making any improvement at all.
Yes.
But if you look over the bigger span, there's definitely a little bit of improvement going on in and mentally as well. Definitely.
And
You
well,
know.
bless you for your UK health segue into the use of yoga there. I like you. You're gold here in this space. And also, it's lovely watching you conduct, by the way. We all know what a conductor in our mind
Yeah.
is like, but you are a joy to watch when you're conducting as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, I sound a bit like I've been stalking you in this space.
I didn't know you. Yeah.
Oh, there he is again, watching me conduct. No, I know where you live, though, but that's the important thing to remember. If I'm by your window later on, you'll know that I've moved in a bit. So we might have arrived at the end of shaking the apples of shaping. Now, 3 things that inspire you.
All right. So the 3 things that inspire me are my wife, Rachel, who I've been married to for 30 years. She's a very creative person and she's a visual person. So where my sort of line of work is sound and music and things, hers is design, surface design. And that's been an amazing combination, because I think there are these really interesting parallels that happen between different disciplines and things. And so she's hugely inspiring for me, Rachel, in all sorts of ways, and sort of keeping me focused, just being together. We both work from home. We work from home for a very long time, together. So yeah.
And she's even the expression, she's got your back. She's watching you when you can't put your socks on.
Literally got my back. Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's right.
I love that. A very generous, big shout out to your wife, Rachel.
Yeah,
there. Lovely.
Yeah. And then the other 2, I mean, we've talked about music already, and then this aspect of it sort of cascade, the sort of the cascading out of appreciation for music through into other things as well. For example, Rachel's dad, Peter Swan, is a painter and an artist. He's in his sort of, I think, mid-80s now, and he's been an enormous friend. And every time I have a conversation with him, I sort of come away thinking about something differently. He's so sharp. He's so observant, of course, as a painter. But he just says things. And one of the things that he said to me that has always kind of stuck me with a bit, he said, he was about 75 or something at the time. He's been painting his entire life. And he paints still lives, landscapes, a little bit of portraiture, but usually in context of something. But he said he kind of sat down to do this still life. And he said, it took me 2 hours to get a mark on the canvas that had any life to it. Wow. And he said, you think by now I'd know how to do this. And I just thought that was so spot on, because that's what it's like. It's a weird thing. You think the more you do something, the quicker and the better and everything. Actually, I think a lot of the time it gets more complex and gets harder to do. So I find, I always find conversation with him as well really, really inspiring. And he just makes me think about all of these things in a different way. And we have a good laugh about it all.
A very precious time with the painter. I love that.
Yeah.
And the creative process described therein, very complex and complex and simple. It's very profound.
Yeah, I have so much respect for him because he's sort of really pure in a way. I mean, he'd say that, and he wouldn't describe himself as that at all. But he engages with what he's doing. There's no formula. There's no. He starts from the beginning each time. I think that's the sort of point that he was making. And I think that's it. That's what it's about.
And of course, your equivalen is an empty musical scape. You've got the the empty page in front of you.
Yeah,
Time.
yeah. The Russian composer Prokofiev, he was saying, he sort of he put this really well. He was saying, writing a melody is about the hardest thing that you can do. You either write something that's simplistic and obvious, or you end up writing something that's too complex or involved or self-conscious or contrived or whatever. To write something that's got a freshness about it and says it well is so hard. And that's coming from Prokofiev, one of the greatest writers of melody ever. If you think of all of those tunes in
it's, by the way, it's always what I'm loving is it's the deep thought involved in creating the simple and the pure. There was a painter and decorator I met once called Keith, whose punchline was, "Yeah, I'll flop it on for you." And you could tell that he was going to come and flop it on, and there was no sophistication there. And he was a bit Captain Cuprinol, which is an advert, does exactly what it says on the tin. He did indeed flop it on, but there was no sophistication there. But what you're talking about beautifully is sophistication involved in the creative process.
Yeah, and I also think that sort of thought can get in the way of it as well. You can definitely think too much and you can overthink it, and having that kind of spontaneity that that you had when you were 4 or 5 when you were flopping it on.
Yeah.
That's what you want to recapture. Yeah,
it is. And my job is to get us to sort of get going with the narrative. It's my fault because I keep going down these wonderfully delicious rabbit holes. It could even be worst case scenario, we'll have you back here in the clearing because this is great. We're not in any hurry, but I just want to go through the structure a tiny bit faster now.
Yeah.
So 2 things that never fail to grab your attention. And if there's any parallel, it doesn't matter.
No. So the first thing is a really good story. And the second thing that never fails to grab my attention is the behavior of our cats, which I find infinitely fascinating and totally unscrutable most of the time.
I love that. That will be so relatable to so many. You're an acute observer and a listener. Great theme throughout. You just love watching and listening. And that's how you become a composer. That's the simplicity. Did you not know that? It's because you're very good at listening and you're very good at watching. Why don't you think of composing? It's what you do. Now, one quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't possibly know until you tell us.
Oh, when I was 8, my 19-year-old sister shot me with a Maasai tribe hunting arrow in our back garden.
You are quite literally the only person I'll ever have in the clearing with that quirky fact. Thank you. Do you want to tell us any more about that? Have you forgiven her? I didn't even think about forgiving it. It never occurred to me. I mean, it was an accident. And obviously.
She'd been traveling. I think she was doing voluntary service overseas in her sort of 19th year. And she came back and she brought, spears and arrows and bows and gourds and mbira thumb piano. She brought back loads of stuff from her travels. She was 19. It's amazing to think. And of course, I was 8, and the first thing that I spotted was this 2 bows and these arrows, which were amazing, and had been given as a gift. I mean, the thought of kind of walking through customs with those now, is kind of. Anyway, she did. But anyway, we got back. So she said, "Well, look, I'll demonstrate how they work." And we had a long, narrow garden, and she did the first one. Shot down the garden, stuck in the back wall. And then I noticed, like, our dog was about 3/4 of the way down the garden. So I said, hold on a minute, I'll go and get the dog and I'll stand to the side and I'll watch it go past. So I got the dog and we stood to the side, what felt like well to the side. And she shot, and I can't remember if it was that one or the one after. Anyway, she shot and the arrow just went straight into my head here.
Oh my gosh, right in the center of the forehead. Good shot.
Yeah, fantastic shot. And I remember my mother, the back of the house, there was just a window and you had to come round to get into the garden. My mother was looking out the window and she said, I knew it was going to happen before it happened. There was nothing I could do about it. And so what I remember then was my mother and father came out, and my mother held my head and my dad pulled it out. and then they stuck a pad on it. And we rushed into the car, and I remember passing my sister in the garden, and I remember feeling it, it's fine. And I was actually really worried about her because she was left behind.
Wow.
She didn't come in the car, and I remember just being really worried about what she must be feeling and everything. But anyway, we drove like crazy to a hospital. The first one was closed, and the second one was open, and there was a Nigerian doctor on A&E, and he said, "This is nothing." He'd seen people with many more arrow injuries than that. And yeah, so anyway, that's a strange
Blimey.
event.
So there's a William Tell thing there, because it was nearly the arrow.
Yeah.
So
William Tells.
I'll tell you what, you stand there and I'll just shoot you with the arrow. William Tell overture. William Tell overture as well. It's going to just keep on giving. It's part of your DNA as a composer. But yes, thank you for that extremely quirky and unusual fact that nobody will ever top, I don't think. Wonderful. I love your generosity as well about worrying about her when you've got a Maasai arrow embedded in your forehead. Bless you.
I think it must have been terrible, because I mean, if it had been an inch either way, it would have gone into my eye, and that would have been it. It would have all been over. It actually hit the hardest part of the skull there.
Yes.
So it was a good shot, but I think for her it was just, just thinking about what might have happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So now we've shaken your tree. Thank you very much indeed. And again, forgive me if I go at any pace now, but we're going to talk about alchemy and gold now. When you're at purpose and in flow, William Goodchild, and you've been giving me alchemy and gold throughout this conversation, but what are the diamonds beneath your feet? What are you here to reveal to the world? When you're at purpose and in flow, what's your alchemy and what's your gold?
I wasn't quite sure what that. I actually looked up diamonds beneath your feet, and there's been a scientific study using seismic sound waves, where they can send these waves into the ground, and they've located an unfathomable amount of diamonds. There's this kind of diamond layer below the surface, and it's somewhere between 90 and 150 miles below the surface is where the diamonds are.
So we know where they are, but we just can't get to them.
We can't get to them. I thought that because of the nature of diamond and its density, they can zap sounds through the earth, and then they can see how the sounds behave as they go down.
Yes.
It's extraordinary. It's like, I don't know how they do it, but I found that really fascinating. There's just a lot of things we don't know. So yeah, so that doesn't really answer the question, but I was trying to understand what diamonds beneath our feet meant. I thought maybe it meant that what we have around us, and if is the stuff that we make our life with. Really, everything that's around us, the people that are around us, comes back to the earlier thing. So is that it, or is it more?
No. What I love about that was you defaulted to being really generous and making it about other people. It's about, in the right way, selfishly, when you are in flow, what is it you bring? And you're bringing it anyway. It's a generosity of spirit. So you're sort of answering it by not answering it. There is a greater rift that I'll describe to listeners about why I keep talking about diamonds beneath your feet, but I will unfold that for the listeners of the show later. And forgive me if that wasn't clear for your answer, but I loved your answer.
No, it's fine. I know what you mean. I think for me, it's about getting, as we were saying, when you're 4, you're effortlessly in that zone, aren't you? Of making, creating, observing, doing all of these things. And I think it's much harder later on, because your thought processes are much more invasive in everything. But in terms of getting in flow and being at purpose, for me, it's about the regularity of working. Woody Allen was a great proponent of that. He only worked 9 to 5. I remember he said 75% of success is turning up, and I've always thought that was spot on.
Love that. We need to say that again. 70%, 75%. You say it.
75% of success in life is simply turning up. This was Woody Allen.
Love that.
And the other thing is that he kind of approached directing and producing his films is a kind of 9 to 5 job, and I love that, because if you're going to do anything for any number of years, it's got to work as part of your life. you know, you can't be working 20 hours a day. You can for a small period of your life, but it's not going to sustain. So yeah, I like that. And I like that. And I met some people when I was younger that did that. I met John Williams, the guitarist, through some friends. And he was the same, this phenomenal talent as a musician and guitarist. But music in his own life formed a kind of part of it. It wasn't the whole picture.
Yes.
And he'd be going off one day in the car and say, oh, where are you going? He was going up to the NEC, you know, to do a concert up there. And he was just like, you know, he had a kind of folk musician mentality, but with this extraordinary talent. So I think being part of life and making whatever it is that you're working in a creative way, whether you do it professionally or not, just a part of that.
William, what's so lovely here is I'm convinced you are going to be a to be continued, because I'm coming up to sort of the end of the scope of the program. But to give you a cake now, your cherry on the cake, it's the legacy of our conversation. How would you like to leave us? And it can go into Shakespeare's All the World's a Stage and all the men and women merely players. When all is said and done, William Goodchild, what's your legacy? How would you most like to be remembered?
I've no idea. That's up to other people how they remember me. I can't sort of influence that really. There was just one quote which I've always remembered. I had a piano teacher called Sidney Harrison who was pretty ancient when I was learning with him, and I remember going along and playing one day, and I just said, it's so difficult, this piece, and he stopped me right there and he said, it's not difficult, it's impossible, and what you've got to do is make it sound easy.
Oh, wonderful.
And that's it. That's really it. And that was like a sort of incredible wake-up moment.
Just say that again, that quote, and we'll let that hang there with a bit of silence on the end. Go for it. It's not
difficult, it's impossible. And what your job is to do is to make it sound easy.
WilliamGoodchild.com is where we can find out more about you. You're also on Wikipedia. Woo, get you. And thank you so much for gracing us here with your presence here in the Good Listening To show, Clearing. To be continued. Will you come back and speak to me again another time?
Absolutely, Chris. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to just chat again together, which we haven't done properly for a while. So it's been great.
And remember, I know where you live, and I'll be at your window shortly. Thank you very much.
With the Dad's Army foliage.
Lovely jubbly. I'm in the shrubbery. So thank you so much. And you've been listening to me, Chris Grimes, on the Good Listening To show. This has been William Goodchild. A delightful third guest, please. Cashier number 3, please. And good night.